That night, amid the laughter of relatives, Mother lifted her chin and declared loudly, "No man would ever choose you." I simply touched the ring hidden in my coat pocket. They didn't know that a month ago. I had already said yes, and tonight, I would show them who I chose and what boundaries I chose to set. In America, they teach us about family and filial piety, but no one teaches us how to answer humiliation with truth, contracts, and stage lights. My name is Ava Whitmore, and at 33, I've learned that family gatherings at the Halcyon County Community Church are less about worship and more about performance. The old wooden pews creak under the weight of judgment, and the stained glass windows filter sunlight into colors that match the various shades of humiliation I've endured over the years. That particular Sunday started like any other. The church basement smelled of instant coffee and casserole dishes, a potent combination that always made my stomach turn. I sat at the end of the long table, watching my mother, Margaret, hold court with the other church ladies. She wore her favorite pearl necklace, the one grandmother left her, and spoke in that theatrical voice she reserved for public appearances. "Poor Ava," she sighed, loud enough for the entire room to hear. 33 and still single. We're considering starting a prayer circle for her fertility window. You know how these things work. Tick, tick, tick. The women tittered. Mrs. Henderson from the HOA board actually checked her watch, as if my ovaries operated on Eastern Standard Time. My father, Paul, sat across the room with the church elders, nodding along to whatever story Reverend Cole was telling. But I caught his glance, my way, saw the slight shake of his head that meant, "Why can't you just be normal?" My sister Sloane, golden child extraordinaire, patted Mother's hand. "Don't worry, Mom. Not everyone can be blessed with a loving marriage." She flashed her wedding ring, a gaudy thing her husband bought with his trust fund money. "Maybe we should organize something fun for Ava. Give her a chance to meet someone." That's when Mother's eyes lit up with an idea that would become my breaking point. "A charity auction," she announced. "We'll auction off a date with Ava for the church renovation fund. Think of it as killing two birds with one stone, helping the church and helping my daughter become less selective." The room erupted in approval. Someone suggested calling it the Single Pledge, and within minutes, they were planning posters and discussing minimum bids. I sat frozen, my hand instinctively moving to my coat pocket where I felt the weight of the ring, Caleb's ring, the one he'd placed on my finger a month ago in his apartment overlooking the harbor. Nobody knew about Caleb Mercer. How could they? The NDA tied to his real estate development deal with Marigold Atlas Ventures meant we couldn't go public until the project cleared regulatory approval. He was building something revolutionary in Harbor Ridge, something that would transform our sleepy coastal town, and premature disclosure could tank the entire venture. So I wore the ring on a chain under my clothes during the day, only sliding it onto my finger during our private moments. "I think $50 minimum bid," Mother continued, now fully invested in her plan. "After all, Ava does have a good job at that company. What's it called? Dear Marigold. Something she can at least offer to pay for dinner." More laughter. My phone buzzed. A text from Caleb board meeting ran late. "Missing you. Can't wait until we can stop hiding." I typed back soon. But as I looked around that church basement at my mother calculating my market value, at my father's disappointed slouch, at my sister's satisfied smirk, I realized soon wasn't enough anymore. They needed to know, not through a quiet announcement or a gentle correction. They needed to feel what I felt in this moment, the complete inversion of power, the public dismantling of their careful narrative. "Ava, sweetheart," Mother called out, "come here and let everyone get a good look at what they're bidding on." I stood slowly, my hand still on the ring in my pocket. Around me, the good people of Halcyon County waited for me to play my part, the desperate spinster, grateful for any attention, resigned to her fate. "Of course, Mother," I said, my voice steady as granite. As I walked to the front of the room, I made a decision. They wanted a performance, I would give them one. But I would choose the stage, the lighting, and most importantly, the final act. And when the curtain fell, they would understand that some boundaries, once crossed, can never be restored. The bidding started at $50. Someone's nephew, apparently, fresh out of college and looking for experience with older women. The insult was so casual, so carelessly cruel that I almost laughed. Instead, I smiled and made a mental note. Every word, every jeer, every bid, I would remember them all. Because in 3 months, at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration, I would cash in these chips. They just didn't know it yet. The drive back from the church auction was silent. Caleb's hands gripped the steering wheel as I stared out at the Atlantic, watching the waves crash against the Harbor Ridge cliffs. He'd arrived just in time to witness the final bid, $73 from Roger Henley, the divorced dentist who'd been leaving inappropriate comments on my social media for years. I wanted to punch every single one of them, Caleb said finally, pulling into his driveway. No, I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. Violence is their language. We're going to speak mine. That night, I made 3 decisions that would reshape everything. First, I drew the boundary. The next morning, I sent my parents a formal email, not a text, not a call, but a documented email with Isabel Duarte, my lawyer friend, copied. Effective immediately. I am limiting our contact to essential legal matters only. The only ongoing business between us is the matter of Foxglove Cottage, grandmother's property, which I understand you're considering leveraging for your anniversary celebration at Ashford Hall. Any communication outside of this specific issue should go through Isabel. My phone exploded within minutes. 17 missed calls from mother, 12 from father, 23 text messages ranging from "How dare you" to "What will people think? I archived them all without reading." Second, Caleb and I made it official legally, if not publicly. On a rainy Tuesday morning, we drove to Ashford Town Hall. The clerk, a woman named Dolores who'd been filing marriages since the 70s, didn't even look up from her crossword puzzle. No photographers today, she asked, adjusting her glasses. No, I said, sliding the application across the marble counter. No announcements, no social media, just the legal documentation. She stamped our marriage certificate at 11:47 a.m., making us officially Mr. and Mrs. Mercer in the eyes of the law, though I would keep Whitmore professionally until we could go public. We celebrated with coffee from the cart outside, standing under the town hall awning as rain pelted the sidewalk. Your parents don't know what's coming, Caleb said, kissing my forehead. No, I agreed, spinning the ring on my finger before reluctantly removing it again. They don't. The third decision was the most calculated. I needed leverage, real, legal, financial leverage. Through my position at Marigold Atlas Ventures, I had access to public records and financial databases. What I found in those databases about my parents' finances was illuminating. They were drowning, elegantly but desperately. The Ashford Hall renovation they'd committed to for their anniversary had depleted their savings. They'd borrowed against Foxglove Cottage, my grandmother's cottage that was supposed to pass to me, and were juggling credit through various HOA-backed loans. The house of cards would collapse within 6 months unless they found new financing. I sat in my office at 9 p.m., Harbor Ridge sleeping beyond my window, and created Harbor Pine Holdings, LLC. Clean, simple, registered in Delaware for privacy. I funded it with my bonus from the Marigold merger and a loan against my own 401k. Then, through a series of entirely legal transactions, Harbor Pine Holdings quietly acquired the distressed debt paper on both Ashford Hall and the secondary lien on Foxglove Cottage. My parents now owed me money. They just didn't know it. Isabel reviewed everything the next week, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine admiration. "This is surgical," she said, flipping through the contracts. "Completely legal, ethically defensible given their attempt to leverage your inheritance, and devastating if deployed correctly." "I don't want to destroy them," I clarified, watching the harbor from her office. "I want them to understand that actions have consequences, that treating your daughter like a commodity to be auctioned has a price." And the anniversary party will proceed exactly as they planned. Except they'll be renting Ashford Hall from Harbor Pine Holdings, and the rental agreement will have very specific morality and conduct clauses. Isabel leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. You're going to make them sign their own humiliation? No, I corrected. I'm going to give them a choice. They can sign over Foxglove Cottage to the educational trust I'm establishing in grandmother's name, receive debt forgiveness, and enjoy their party with certain restrictions. Or they can refuse, default on their obligations, and face the consequences. All of this because of a church auction. I thought about the years of small cuts, the constant comparisons to Sloane, the public dissections of my worth based on my marital status, the reduction of my entire existence to my reproductive potential. No, I said quietly. All of this because they never learned that boundaries matter, that respect isn't optional, that a woman's value isn't determined by who chooses her, but by the choices she makes. Isabel nodded, understanding. When do you want to execute? Their anniversary, January 15th, in front of everyone who witnessed my humiliation. That's in 3 months. Exactly. Enough time for them to dig themselves deeper and for all the paperwork to be unassailable. As I left Isabel's office, my phone buzzed with another message from Mother, forwarded through the church prayer chain. Please pray for our troubled daughter Ava, who has chosen to distance herself from family during this difficult time of her life. I screenshotted it, adding it to my growing folder of evidence. Then I texted Caleb. They're positioning themselves as victims already. His response was immediate. Let them. It'll make the reversal even more complete. October bled into November, and with it came the systematic assembly of my leverage. I worked late at Marigold Atlas Ventures, but my real work began after hours, mapping the financial web my parents had woven in their desperation to maintain appearances. The HOA credit system was particularly fascinating. My father, as a board member of the Harbor Ridge Homeowners Association, had access to emergency credit lines meant for community improvements. He'd been creative with the definitions claiming the Ashford Hall renovation was a community heritage project, since they planned to host charity events there. Technically legal, ethically questionable, and perfectly vulnerable to a hostile takeover of the debt. I met Mason Linley at a coffee shop in downtown Ashford on a gray Thursday morning. He managed several historic properties, including Ashford Hall, and had a reputation for strict professionalism. Ms. Whitmore, he said, reviewing the papers I'd brought. Say, Harbor Pine Holdings wants to assume the renovation debt on Ashford Hall. We're interested in preserving historic properties, I replied, stirring my coffee. The current debt holders seem willing to sell at 70 cents on the dollar. It's a good investment for us, and it ensures the renovation continues without interruption. Mason studied me carefully. The Whitmore anniversary celebration is scheduled for January 15th. That's your parents', isn't it? It is. And Harbor Pine Holdings would honor their reservation. Of course, though the rental agreement would need to be updated to reflect the new ownership structure. Standard liability coverage, conduct clauses, I'm sure you understand. He understood perfectly. Mason had been at 3 events where my parents had publicly discussed my situation. He'd watched my mother organize the church auction. His expression suggested he knew exactly what I was doing. I'll need everything properly documented, he said finally. I run these properties by the book. I wouldn't expect anything less. The paper acquisition proceeded smoothly. By Thanksgiving, which I spent with Caleb's family in Maine, blissfully free of humiliation, Harbor Pine Holdings controlled both the Ashford Hall debt and the secondary position on Foxglove Cottage. Total investment $187,000. Total control complete. Isabel drew up the rental agreement for the anniversary party. It was a masterpiece of legal precision. Clause 7.3.2 specified that any discriminatory, harassing, or demeaning speech directed at guests or staff would result in immediate termination of the event. Clause 8.1.5 gave the venue owner sole control over audio-visual equipment in case of contract violations. They'll never read it, Isabel warned. They'll sign whatever Mason puts in front of them. That's fine. Mason will read it. He'll execute it properly. I also assembled my allies carefully. Reverend Cole, despite his friendship with my father, had been increasingly uncomfortable with the public ridicule. When I approached him after a November service, my first appearance at church since the boundary, he listened. "I'm not asking you to take sides," I said, standing in his simple office. "I'm asking you to be willing to confirm facts if asked. Did the auction happen? Did you witness the public statements about my worth as a person? That's all." He nodded slowly. "Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see how this has evolved, which is why Foxglove Cottage should honor her memory, not be leveraged for a party." The revelation about their plans for grandmother's cottage had come through the debt documents. They'd already signed preliminary papers to use it as collateral for an additional $40,000 loan to cover the anniversary party catering and entertainment. The cottage where I'd spent every childhood summer, where grandmother had taught me to read financial statements over tea and shortbread, was about to be gambling chips for their vanity. Caleb found me crying over those papers one night in early December. "We can stop this now," he offered, holding me as I shook with rage. "Buy them out completely. Force the issue before the party." "No," I said, wiping my eyes. "They need to choose. In public, in front of everyone who laughed at that auction, they need to actively decide between their pride and grandmother's legacy." The invitation to the 40th anniversary celebration arrived the second week of December. Addressed to Ms. Ava Whitmore and guest, they couldn't even bring themselves to imagine I might have someone specific to bring. The cardstock was expensive, the calligraphy perfect. Inside, a handwritten note from Mother. "Despite your recent distance, family is family. We hope you'll attend and perhaps even say a few words about your father and me. The entire congregation will be there." I texted Isabel. "They want me to speak." Her response was immediate. "Perfect. Accept immediately." I did, sending a formal RSVP through Mason, who confirmed that yes, the venue rental agreement had been signed without review, and yes, all clauses were now legally binding. Meanwhile, I created the Foxglove Educational Trust, naming it after grandmother's favorite flower. The paperwork was filed with the state, the mission statement clear, providing scholarships for young women pursuing financial literacy and independence. The first donor, listed anonymously, was Harbor Pine Holdings. 3 days before Christmas, Sloan called me directly, breaking the communication boundary. "Whatever you're planning for Mom and Dad's anniversary, don't," she said without preamble. "They're fragile right now. The finances are a matter of public record." I interrupted. "As was the auction, as were the statements about my value as a human being." "You're really going to ruin their anniversary over hurt feelings." I thought about all the ways I could respond. Instead, I simply said, "I'm going to give them a choice. The same way they gave me one at that auction: submit to humiliation or be labeled difficult. Except their choice will have legal weight." "You've changed," Sloan said after a pause. "No," I corrected. "I've finally decided to stop shrinking." The line went dead. I looked at the planning board in my home office contracts, timelines, contingencies, all leading to January 15th at 8 p.m. They'd wanted to auction me off fine, but they were about to learn that sometimes. The asset you're bidding on has already structured the deal. The week between Christmas and New Year's became my evidence-gathering phase. My parents, emboldened by my RSVP to their anniversary party, had resumed their public commentary with renewed vigor. At the December HOA meeting, which I attended with a small digital recorder in my pocket, Margaret held court during the social hour. I stood by the coffee station, invisible in my navy suit, while she regaled the board with her latest theory. "It's clearly a personality disorder," she announced, loud enough for the entire room. 33 years old, reasonably attractive, good job, but can't keep a man. That's not circumstances, that's character. Paul and I have accepted that we'll never have grandchildren from that branch of the family tree." Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. "Have you considered professional help for her? I mean, we've suggested everything: therapy, dating coaches, even offered to pay for one of those matchmaking services. But Ava thinks she's above it all, too good for regular men, apparently. Though after that church auction, you'd think she'd be grateful for any attention. I lifted my phone, pretending to check emails while ensuring the recording app captured every word. Paul stood across the room with the other board members, discussing the new parking regulations, but his occasional glances my way confirmed he heard every word his wife spoke. "The auction was generous of you." Roger Henley chimed in, the same man whose $73 bid had won him a dinner I never attended, claiming a work emergency. Not many parents would put themselves out there like that for an ungrateful daughter. "We do what we can," Margaret sighed dramatically. "Though I fear it's too late. Her eggs are practically expired at this point." The laughter that followed was captured in perfect digital clarity. 3 days later, Sloane organized what she called a bridal mock shower at her house, ostensibly to cheer me up, but actually to twist the knife deeper. She'd invited 12 women from the church, decorated with white ribbons and fake roses, and created games typically reserved for actual brides. "Let's play Guess the Groom," she announced, pulling out cards with male celebrities' photos. "Since Ava doesn't have a real one, we can let her practice." I sat in the chair decorated as the bride's throne, wearing the plastic tiara they'd forced on my head, and smiled. Every humiliating game, every pitying look, every whispered "poor thing" was being documented by the young woman Sloane had hired to photograph the event, a woman who, unknown to my sister, had already agreed to provide copies of all images to Isabel for a modest fee. "Ava," called out Jennifer Walsh, one of Mother's bridge partners, "you should give a speech practice for when it's real." I stood, still wearing the ridiculous tiara, and looked at the assembled women. "Thank you all for coming," I said clearly. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are and what you think of me. This clarity is a gift I'll treasure forever." The room fell silent for a moment before Sloane laughed nervously. "She's so funny, always so serious about everything. That's probably why she's still single." More laughter, more evidence. The crescendo came on January 7th, 8 days before the anniversary party. My parents hosted a preparation dinner at the country club for the key organizers. Through Mason, who was invited as the venue manager, I learned they planned to include a comedy slideshow featuring photos of me at various ages with captions like "still waiting" and "maybe next year." Mason called me at 10:15 p.m. that night. "They've gone too far," he said quietly. "The slideshow, it's cruel. Ava, I've seen middle school bullies with more restraint." "Did you document it?" "Photos of every slide on my phone. They're proud of it. Your mother called it motivational humor." "Send them to Isabel, please." "Already done." I sat in my living room, Caleb beside me, reviewing the accumulated evidence. 3 months of recordings, photos, emails, social media posts, a comprehensive chronicle of sustained public humiliation disguised as parental concern. "This is enough to destroy them socially," Caleb observed. "If you released this—" "I'm not going to release it," I interrupted. "I'm not trying to become a viral victim or destroy their lives. I just need them to know I have it, that their words have weight and consequences, that when they stand up at their party to make another joke about their worthless spinster daughter, I can stop them." The final piece fell into place on January 10th. My parents, desperate to cover the last of the catering costs, had signed the additional loan against Foxglove Cottage, $40,000 at 12% interest, due in full within 6 months. The paperwork was public record by January 12th. Isabel called me that afternoon. "Harbor Pine Holdings can buy this note, too. You'd control everything." "Do it. That's nearly $250,000 in total exposure. Ava." "Grandmother left me 3 times that in her will," I reminded her. "Money that's been sitting in conservative investments while her cottage, her actual home, gets leveraged for shrimp towers and chocolate fountains. She would approve of this use of funds." That night, I stood in Foxglove Cottage for the first time in months. My parents had already started moving furniture, preparing to stage it for potential buyers if needed. Grandmother's reading chair was gone. The kitchen table where she'd taught me compound interest was in storage, but the bones of the house remained the built-in bookshelves, the window seat overlooking the garden, the stairs that creaked on the 3rd and 7th step. "I'm going to save you," I whispered to the empty rooms, "and they're going to hand you over willingly." My phone buzzed with a text from Mother looking forward to your speech on Saturday. "Please wear something appropriate. The photographer will be there." I typed back, "I'll wear white." The dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared several times before her response. "That's for brides." "Dear, try not to embarrass yourself further." I smiled, touching the ring hidden beneath my sweater. Saturday was 3 days away. The stage was set, the contracts signed, the evidence cataloged. They wanted a show. They were about to get one. January 15th arrived with the kind of crystalline winter clarity that made Harbor Ridge postcard perfect. Ashford Hall stood magnificent against the evening sky, its renovated facade glowing under the professional lighting Caleb's crew had installed. Every detail was precise, from the heated entrance tent to the valet parking signs. My parents had spent everything for this moment. I arrived at 6:30 p.m. About 90 minutes before the official start. Mason met me at the service entrance, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes alert. "Everything is prepared according to specifications," he said, leading me through the back corridors. "The audio-visual system is fully integrated. The emergency override controls are here." He showed me a discreet panel near the stage. "The rental agreement is posted in the manager's office, should anyone need to review it. Has anyone asked to see it? Your parents signed it without reading. Your sister glanced at the signature page. No one else has inquired." I walked onto the main floor, transformed into an elegant ballroom with round tables for 200 guests, each centerpiece worth more than most people's car payments. The stage dominated the far end, complete with professional lighting and a massive screen for the slideshow. "The comedy presentation about me," I said quietly. "Is it loaded?" "Your mother insisted on testing it 3 times. It's cued to play after the dinner service, before speeches." Mason paused. "There's a particularly cruel segment comparing you to successful women your age who are married." She seemed very proud of the research. Caleb arrived at 7 p.m., entering through the main entrance in his tailored suit. To everyone else, he was just the contractor who'd overseen the renovation, invited as a courtesy. We didn't acknowledge each other beyond professional nods, but his presence steadied me. By 7:45 p.m., the hall filled with guests, the entire congregation, the HOA board, business associates, extended family from 3 states, everyone who'd witnessed my humiliation over the years, gathered in one room. I stood near the bar, sipping water from a champagne flute, wearing the white dress that had caused my mother such consternation. "Ava," her voice carried across the room, "don't lurk by the service areas. Come greet our guests properly." She wore burgundy silk, diamonds at her throat. Grandmother's diamonds, I noted, the ones specifically left to me but somehow never transferred. Paul stood beside her in his tuxedo, already working his 3rd whiskey. "You wore white," Mother hissed when I approached. "I specifically told you, it's appropriate for new beginnings." I replied calmly. She started to respond but was interrupted by the Henderson family arriving. The next 30 minutes became a receiving line of pity, each guest offering condolences for my single status, suggestions for meeting men, stories about their nieces who found love at 35, 38, 40. Dinner service began at 8:15 p.m. I sat at table 12, the singles table, positioned perfectly to view the stage but far enough from the family tables to emphasize my status. Roger Henley had been seated next to me, Mother's final twist of the knife. "Your parents throw quite a party," he said, leaning too close. "That auction money well spent." "The auction," I repeated. "Yes, let's remember that." The slideshow began at 9:20 p.m., right on schedule. The lights dimmed, the screen illuminated, and there I was, baby photos morphing into childhood, teenage years, college, all accompanied by increasingly pointed captions. "Still waiting at 25. Career woman at 30, but no ring. 33 and counting? The crowd laughed, some uncomfortably, but they laughed. I saw Isabel near the back, her phone discreetly recording. Mason stood by the control panel. Caleb remained perfectly still at table 7. The final slide showed me at the church auction with the caption, "Available to highest bidder, minimum bid $50. The laughter peaked. Mother stood, moving toward the microphone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. As you can see, we maintain our sense of humor about all aspects of family life, even the disappointing ones. That was the trigger. Mason activated clause 7.3.2. The screen went black. The microphone cut out. The lights shifted to full brightness. "I apologize," Mason announced, using the venue's override system. "We're experiencing a technical adjustment. In the meantime, I need to invite the contracted venue representative to address a rental agreement matter." I stood, walking to the stage with measured steps. The room buzzed with confusion. Mother tried the dead microphone, then turned to Mason with fury. "The representative for Harbor Pine Holdings," Mason continued. "Ms. Ava Whitmore." The silence that followed was absolute. I took the working microphone from Mason, looking out at 200 faces shifting from confusion to shock. "Good evening. As the authorized representative of Harbor Pine Holdings, I need to address a contract violation that just occurred. The rental agreement for tonight's event specifically prohibits discriminatory or demeaning speech about any guest. The slideshow and subsequent commentary violated this clause." "This is ridiculous," Paul shouted from his table. "You can't." "I can," I interrupted. "Harbor Pine Holdings owns this venue's event contract tonight. We also hold the renovation debt on Ashford Hall and, as of January 12th, both lines on Foxglove Cottage, my grandmother's home that my parents leveraged to pay for tonight's demonstration." I clicked the presentation remote. The screen displayed the legal documents, deeds, contracts, loan papers, all with Harbor Pine Holdings as the creditor. "However," I continued, my voice steady, "I'm prepared to offer a resolution." The room held its breath. Margaret had sunk into her chair, face pale. Paul was turning an alarming shade of red. Sloane sat frozen, mentally calculating implications. "Option 1, I said, advancing the slide to show the Foxglove Educational Trust documentation. "Sign over Foxglove Cottage to this educational trust, established in my grandmother's memory. In exchange, Harbor Pine Holdings will forgive all debts, and tonight's event continues without microphones for family speeches." I clicked again. "Option 2, refuse. Maintain your current debt structure, and this event ends now per contract violation. The loans come due per their original terms." "You planned this," Mother whispered, her voice carrying in the silence despite the dead microphone. "I planned for a choice," I corrected. "The same way you planned that auction. The difference is, my planning involved legal documents rather than public humiliation." I set down the microphone and pulled out the ring. Caleb's ring, sliding it onto my finger in full view of everyone. "1 month ago," I said, my voice carrying clearly without amplification. "I said yes to someone who chose me." "We've been legally married since November. You've been so busy auctioning me off and mocking my worth. You never noticed I'd already chosen my own value." The revelation rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Caleb rose from table 7, walking toward the stage with deliberate calm. The contractor everyone had dismissed as just another vendor, now revealed as my husband. "That's impossible," Sloane burst out, finding her voice. "You would have told, we would have known. The same way you knew I was worth more than a $73 joke." I asked. "The same way you knew grandmother's cottage meant everything to me while you planned to sell it for catering." Caleb reached the stage, standing beside me but not touching. This wasn't about displaying affection. It was about displaying truth. His presence was statement enough. "This is extortion," Paul snarled, pushing back from his table. "You can't force us to sign anything." "I'll call your lawyer." Isabel stepped forward from the back of the room. "I'm happy to review all documentation." Every contract here is legal. Every transaction above board. Your daughter isn't extorting you, she's offering you mercy. I picked up the microphone again, its weight familiar in my hand. Let me be clearer about what Harbor Pine Holdings discovered in acquiring your debts. I clicked to the next slide, showing the HOA credit lines. Claiming personal anniversary parties as community heritage projects to access association emergency funds, the HOA board might be very interested in reviewing those applications. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, eyes turning toward Paul. The choice is simple, I continued. Sign Foxglove Cottage to the Educational Trust, a tax-deductible charitable donation. By the way, and all of this disappears. Your debts are forgiven. Your party continues. Your reputation remains intact. Or refuse and face the full legal and financial consequences of your decisions. You ungrateful! Margaret started to rise, but Mason stepped forward. Ma'am, I need to remind you that any further violations of the contract's conduct clause will result in immediate venue closure. We have 200 witnesses. She sank back down, tears beginning to streak her makeup. But they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of rage at being outmaneuvered. Reverend Cole stood slowly from his table. May I? He asked, gesturing to the microphone. I handed it to him, curious. I've watched this family for 15 years, he said quietly, his voice carrying pastoral authority. I've remained silent through too much. Margaret, Paul, you turned your daughter's life into public entertainment. You mocked her at church functions, HOA meetings, family gatherings. You literally auctioned her for charity donations. He paused, looking directly at them. Now she's offering you charity in return. I'd take it. The room remained silent, but I caught nods from several directions. People who'd laughed uncomfortably at my parents' jokes for years, finally given permission to acknowledge the cruelty. The documentation is here, I said, gesturing to the table Mason had prepared with the transfer papers. Isabel will witness. Along with the notary we've arranged, you have 10 minutes to decide. 10 minutes! Sloane stood, indignant. You're giving them 10 minutes to decide about grandmother's cottage. They gave me 30 seconds at that auction before starting the bidding. I replied, 10 minutes is generous. I stepped off the stage, Caleb beside me, and walked to the side of the room. The crowd erupted in hushed conversations, everyone watching my parents huddle with Sloane at their table. Roger Henley approached, his face flushed. You made me look like a fool. That auction. You bid $73 for a human being, Caleb said quietly, stepping slightly forward. You made yourself look like a fool. Roger retreated. At 8 minutes, Margaret stood and walked to the signing table, Paul behind her. Her hands shook as she picked up the pen. Before you sign, I said, returning to the microphone, let me tell you what the Foxglove Educational Trust will do. It will provide scholarships for young women pursuing financial independence, the kind grandmother believed in. The cottage will be preserved as a study center and library. Her legacy will help other women avoid being valued only for their marital status. Just stop, Margaret said, her voice broken. We'll sign. They did. Both signatures witnessed and notarized at 9:43 p.m. The crowd watched in absolute silence as the documents were sealed. I took the microphone one last time. The anniversary party may continue. The bar remains open. The music will resume momentarily. However, per the rental agreement, no family speeches will be permitted due to the earlier violation. I paused, looking directly at my parents. 40 years of marriage is an achievement, but it doesn't excuse 40 years of diminishing your children. Congratulations on your anniversary. The Foxglove Educational Trust thanks you for your donation. I set down the microphone and walked toward the exit, Caleb's hand finally finding mine. Behind us, the music resumed some generic instrumental piece that couldn't quite mask the stunned murmuring of 200 guests. At the door, I turned back once. My parents sat at their anniversary table, surrounded by flowers and crystal and the ruins of their careful construction of superiority. Margaret was crying real tears now. Paul stared at the signed documents as if they might spontaneously combust. Sloane started toward me, but I shook my head. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. You did it, Caleb said quietly as we stepped into the January night. No, I corrected, breathing in the cold, clean air. They did it to themselves. I just held up the mirror and made them look. Mason appeared in the doorway behind us. Ms. Whitmore, the notary needs you to sign the receipt of transfer for the trust. I nodded, taking one last look at Ashford Hall lit up like a jewel against the dark sky, beautiful and cold and no longer holding any power over me. Also, Mason added quietly, that was the most professional devastation I've ever witnessed. Your grandmother would be proud. I thought of grandmother, teaching me about compound interest and self-respect in equal measure, and smiled. She always said the best revenge was a well-structured deal. The notary, a thin woman named Patricia Chen who'd driven up from Boston, had set up her materials in Mason's office. The space felt surreal after the chaos of the main hall, quiet, orderly, with only the distant murmur of the resumed party filtering through the walls. We need both parties to acknowledge the transfer, Patricia said, adjusting her glasses. The donors and the trust representative. My parents entered the office like condemned prisoners, Margaret clutching Paul's arm. Up close, without the stage lighting, they looked older, diminished. The careful construction of their evening had crumbled, leaving them exposed. This is what you wanted, Margaret asked, her voice hoarse. To humiliate us in front of everyone. You humiliated me for 33 years. I replied evenly. I gave you 10 minutes and a choice. That's more dignity than you ever offered me. Paul's face had progressed from red to an unhealthy purple. That cottage was our retirement security. It was my inheritance. I cut him off. Grandmother left it to me in her will. You convinced me to let you manage it when I was 23 and grieving. 10 years of management led to 2 liens and a $40,000 party loan. Family helps family, he muttered. Family respects family, I countered. Or they face consequences. Patricia cleared her throat. I need to confirm both parties understand the transfer, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. You're voluntarily transferring full ownership of the property at 47 Foxglove Lane to the Foxglove Educational Trust. Under duress, Paul spat. Isabel stepped forward. I'll need that clarified for the record. Are you stating you were physically threatened or illegally coerced? Paul's jaw worked. No. Then the transfer is voluntary, if reluctant. Patricia noted. Ms. Whitmore, as trustee, you accept the property on behalf of the trust. I do. The words hung in the air, the same words I'd said to Caleb months ago, now repurposed for a different kind of union. There's one more matter, I said, pulling out a sealed envelope. The trust documentation includes a provision. Mother, Father, you retain lifetime visitation rights to Foxglove Cottage for 4 specific dates, annually, Grandmother's birthday, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas Eve, but only if you attend a family counseling session within the next 60 days and provide proof of completion. Margaret's tears had stopped. She stared at me with something between shock and possibly the faintest glimpse of understanding. You're giving us access. Conditional access. Grandmother believed in redemption through effort. The counseling isn't negotiable. A professional needs to explain to you why auctioning your daughter and publicly mocking her fertility is abuse, not humor. Sloane, who'd been silent in the corner, finally spoke. This is insane. You destroyed Mom and Dad's anniversary over jokes. Over systematic dehumanization. I corrected. You participated too. Sloane. That bridal mock shower where you made me wear a toy tiara while everyone laughed. The photographer you hired sent me every photo. Would you like me to create a slideshow? She fell silent. Patricia completed the notarization at 9:57 p.m., applying her seal with practiced precision. The documents were sorted into folders, copies for all parties, originals for filing. The debt forgiveness documents, Isabel said, producing another set of papers. Harbor Pine Holdings formally forgives all outstanding debts upon successful transfer of the property. I signed where indicated, each signature feeling like shedding weight I'd carried for years. $227,000, Paul said hollowly. You spent that much to prove a point. I spent that much to save grandmother's legacy and establish boundaries, I corrected. You spent $40,000 you didn't have on chocolate fountains and professionally crafted insults. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mason entered, looking apologetic. The guests are asking about speeches. Should I announce that the family is handling some estate planning? I said. The party continues, but family remarks have been postponed indefinitely. He nodded and withdrew. Margaret stood slowly, aged a decade in an hour. People will talk. People always talked, I replied. The difference is now they'll talk about how I stood up for myself instead of how pathetic I am. Is that what this was about, revenge? I thought about it, really considered the question. No, this was about transformation. Yours and mine. I transformed from your victim to my own defender. You transformed from creditors to charity donors. Everyone wins, it's just not the victory you planned. Caleb, who'd been silent throughout the signing, finally spoke. We should go. Let them return to their party. But Margaret wasn't done. When did you really get married? November 12th, 2:23 p.m. At Ashford Town Hall. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have stopped the auction jokes, the slideshow, the public humiliation? I let the questions hang. We both know the answer. Paul slumped in his chair. So, everything tonight, the contracts, the timing, you planned it all? I learned from the best, I said, looking at him directly. You taught me that power matters more than family, that public perception trumps private pain, that worth is determined by arbitrary markers. I just played by your rules better than you did. Those weren't lessons we meant to. Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. Another lesson from you. Patricia finished packing her supplies. Isabel gathered the completed documents. The business was concluded, the transfer complete, the debts forgiven, all witnessed, notarized, and indisputable. The counseling, Margaret said suddenly. If we go, we can visit the cottage, 4 days a year. And only if you complete the sessions and provide documentation? What if we refuse? Then the cottage becomes permanently closed to you. Your choice, as always. She looked at Paul, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. We'll go. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't understanding. But it was acknowledgement, the first real acknowledgement that their behavior warranted professional intervention. Isabel has the counselor's information, I said. Someone who specializes in family dynamics and emotional abuse. They have an opening Thursday at 2 p.m. I moved toward the door, Caleb beside me, but I turned back once more. Happy anniversary. May the next 40 years be more honest than the first. We left them there in Mason's office with their forgiven debts and mandatory counseling referral, while 200 guests wondered why the anniversary couple had disappeared during their own celebration. The last thing I heard as we walked down the corridor was Margaret's voice, small and confused. She wore white. She wore white because she's married. Even in victory, she could only see the symbols, not the substance. The January rain started as we exited Ashford Hall, a fine mist that turned the parking lot lights into halos. Caleb opened his umbrella, but I stepped beyond its shelter, letting the cold droplets hit my face. I needed to feel something real after the surreal theater of the past hour. Your parents are leaving, Caleb observed, watching through the glass doors as Margaret and Paul made their way back to the main hall. They moved like sleepwalkers, automatic smiles plastered on for guests who didn't yet know the full story. Let them pretend, I said. It's what they do best. Mason appeared with a facilities key card. Ms. Whitmore, this provides access to Foxglove Cottage. The locks were changed this afternoon per your instructions. Your parents' old keys won't work. I took the card. its weight significant despite its size. "Thank you, Mason, for everything. The party has another 2 hours scheduled," he said, "but I suspect many guests will leave early once word spreads." He was right. Already, people were filtering out, collecting coats and whispering urgently. The HOA board members looked particularly unsettled. Paul's creative financing would be tomorrow's emergency meeting agenda. We drove to Foxglove Cottage in silence, the rain intensifying against the windshield. The cottage sat dark on its small bluff, waiting. I used the new key card, hearing the electronic lock disengage a modern addition to the 1920s door. Inside, the emptiness echoed. My parents had stripped it of grandmother's furniture, but they couldn't remove her presence from the walls themselves. Caleb found the circuit breaker, flooding the space with light. "Tomorrow, we'll start moving things back," he said. "I saved everything they put in storage." "You did. Bought the storage unit contents the day they defaulted on that payment, too. Your grandmother's reading chair is in my warehouse, along with her books, her desk, everything." I kissed him then, deeply, gratefully. This man who understood that revenge meant nothing without restoration. My phone buzzed with messages word spreading through the congregation, the HOA, the extended family network. I deleted them unread. Tomorrow would bring consequences, conversations, reckonings. Tonight was for silence. We stood on the cottage's small balcony, looking out at the harbor. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp and clean. Below, the lights of Harbor Ridge spread like a constellation. Somewhere among them, my parents' party continued without speeches, without microphones, without the grand finale they'd planned. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked. I considered the question, turning the ring on my finger no longer hidden, catching the light from inside the cottage. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that they chose cruelty so consistently that this became the only language they'd understand. But regret the action itself? No." My phone rang. Sloan. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mother. Then Paul. Then numbers. I didn't recognize probably party guests wanting the story straight from the source. "They'll want explanations," Caleb said. "They'll want me to apologize, to soften it, to make them comfortable again." I turned off the phone entirely. That's not my job anymore. At 11:47 p.m., exactly 3 months from when we'd gotten legally married at Town Hall, Caleb pulled out a small box. "I know we did everything backwards," he said. "The marriage before the wedding, the legal before the celebration. But I thought tonight, after everything, we should do one thing traditionally." Inside was a second ring, a simple band to complement the engagement ring I'd hidden for so long. "No audience," he continued. "No performance. Just us." I held out my hand and he slipped the band on, completing the set. In the empty cottage that would soon house dreams instead of debt. We had our real ceremony, the one that mattered. The next morning, Harbor Ridge woke to the news. The Whitmore anniversary party that ended in property transfer. The daughter who'd orchestrated a corporate takeover of her own humiliation. The secret marriage that invalidated years of public mockery. But I didn't wake in Harbor Ridge. Caleb and I were already on the road to Maine, a week's honeymoon that we'd postponed for this careful campaign. Behind us, Isabel fielded calls and Mason managed the cottage's transformation into the trust's headquarters. The foundation's website went live at noon, accepting applications for the first Foxglove scholarships. 3 days later, Margaret sent a single text, "We've scheduled the counseling." I didn't respond. The boundaries were set, the consequences delivered, the cottage saved. There was nothing left to say. A week after the anniversary, I returned to work at Marigold Atlas Ventures. My colleagues had heard fragments, small-town gossip travels even to corporate offices. But when the senior partners learned about Harbor Pine Holdings' strategic acquisition and successful value extraction, they weren't horrified, they were impressed. "You leveraged emotional liability into tangible assets," the managing director said, "then converted those assets into tax-advantaged charitable giving while maintaining stakeholder compliance. That's MBA case study material. He was wrong about one thing. It wasn't about the money or the strategy. It was about the moment Margaret's face crumbled when she realized her daughter had learned her own game and played it better. It was about Paul's signature shaking as he signed away the collateral of his pride. It was about 200 witnesses learning that the woman they'd pitied had been the one holding the cards all along. 6 months later, the Foxglove Educational Trust awarded its first scholarships. 15 young women from New England, pursuing degrees in finance, law, and business. At the ceremony, held in the renovated cottage, I stood where grandmother's reading chair had been returned and spoke about the intersection of self-worth and net worth. Margaret and Paul attended their first permitted visit after completing 8 weeks of counseling. They sat in the back row, silent. When one scholarship recipient talked about escaping a family that didn't believe in her potential, I saw Margaret flinch. Progress, perhaps, or just performance. With them, I'd never fully know, but it didn't matter anymore. The cottage was saved, the trust funded, the scholarships flowing. And somewhere in Boston, Caleb was negotiating his next development deal, this time with both our names on the contracts, visible and legal. The rain that had started the night of the anniversary had washed Harbor Ridge clean. Standing in Foxglove Cottage that evening, watching the sun set over the water, I thought about grandmother's favorite saying, "Money isn't power, dear. Knowledge is power. Money is just the proof that you have it." She was right, as always, but she'd missed one element. Sometimes, the greatest power isn't in what you can destroy. It's in what you choose to build from the ruins. The cottage stood solid around me, no longer collateral but foundation. And for the first time in 33 years, I stood solid within it, not despite my family's cruelty, but transformed by my response to it. The last laugh, it turned out, was no laugh at all. It was a signature on a deed, a ring worn openly, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-structured deal. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts on Ava's journey. Did she go too far? Or was her revenge perfectly justified? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspective.